If I told you someone chose you for me years ago, would you stay?
I'd stay long enough to hear why.
The workshop smelled like cedar and varnish, and it was past midnight, and the boat my mentor had spent 7 years building sat finished between us for the first time, gleaming under the one bare bulb. Nell was on an overturned crate, with her father's journal open in her lap, and she'd gone very still, and when she finally looked up at me, her face was wet and open, in a way I had never once seen it. "Silas," she whispered, "my dad chose you for me." I stood there with a varnish rag in my hand, and did not yet understand that a man I'd loved like a father had spent 7 years, quietly, patiently, the way he built everything, planning this exact moment, long before either of us knew it was coming. Let me back up. My name is Silas Ford. I'm 31 years old, and I build wooden boats in a shop on a cold stretch of coast, in a town where the fog rolls in most mornings, and half the men make their living off the water. I didn't grow up here, and I didn't grow up building anything. I grew up nowhere, really. A string of foster homes, a father I never met, a mother who left when I was small. By the time I was 24, I was drifting through this town with everything I owned in a duffel bag, taking day work where I could find it, sleeping in my truck. I was the kind of young man the world had written off before he'd started, and I'd more or less agreed with its assessment. Then, on a gray afternoon 7 years ago, I walked into Amos Colby's boat shop looking for a day's work, and my whole life changed, though it would take me 7 years to find out how much. Amos was a master boat builder, the last real one on that coast. He was in his 60s then, big and slow and quiet, with hands like weathered rope, and an unhurried way of looking at a person that made you feel measured but not judged. He looked at me a long moment that first afternoon, this drifting kid with a duffel bag and nothing to show for himself, and then he said, "You know how to work?" "I know how to work," I said. "Then don't just stand there," he said, and handed me a plank. That was it. I never left. Amos took me on as an apprentice, and over 7 years he taught me everything he knew: how to steam bend oak, how to read the grain, how to fit a plank so tight the sea can't find its way in. But more than the trade, he taught me the thing I'd been missing my whole life, which was how to be a steady man. He'd put his rope hand over mine on a plane and say, "Slow down, Silas. You're building a thing that has to carry people safe across deep water, long after you're gone. You don't rush a thing like that. You build it patient. You build it honest. You build it to outlast you. That's the whole trade. That's the whole of being a man worth anything, too, if you're paying attention." I was paying attention. That old man gave a discarded kid a father, a trade, and a spine, and I would have walked into the ocean for him. I thought it was kindness. I thought I'd just gotten lucky, wandering into the one shop with the one man decent enough to take me in. Before I tell you what it actually was, what that whole 7 years actually was, if you believe a good man can change the entire course of your life without you ever knowing what he's really doing, tap that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. Alright, back to it. Amos had a daughter, Nell. She lived 2 hours up the coast, and in 7 years I could count on my hands the times I met her. She came for holidays, mostly. Quiet, careful, with her father's watchful eyes and a guardedness around her, like a fence you could see from a distance. She was polite to me, and kept me at arm's length, and I understood, because I kept everyone at arm's length too. Amos told me, once, in the low way he said the important things, what had happened to her. She'd married young, 20, barely, to a man named Shane, who'd turned out to be cruel in the quiet way that doesn't leave marks. Who'd spent 3 years making her small before she finally got out. And after that, Nell had built herself a careful, solitary life 2 hours up the coast, and stopped believing, Amos said, that love was a thing that happened to people like her. It broke something in her. he told me one evening, both of us watching the water. My girl used to laugh with her whole body. Now she flinches when a man's kind to her, because the last one used kindness as bait. He was quiet a long moment. A father shouldn't outlive the sound of his daughter laughing. But there it is. I felt for her, the way you feel for someone you recognize. But she was Amos's daughter, and she lived 2 hours away behind a fence, and I was the apprentice, and there was a line there I'd never have dreamed of crossing. Though I'll admit, looking back, Amos had a way of mentioning her when I was around, of finding reasons for me to be at the house when she visited, of saying, "You'd like my Nell," if she ever let anybody close enough. I thought he was just a lonely old man missing his girl. I had no idea. None of us did. And then, that spring, Amos died. It was his heart, in the end, though he'd never told a soul it was failing. I found out afterward he'd known for over a year, and worked right up to the last week, patient and unhurried, like a man finishing something on a schedule only he could see. He died in his sleep in the little house above the shop, and burying him took a piece out of me I'll never get back, because he was the only father I ever had, and I was the one who found him, and the whole coast came to the funeral, and I stood at the back because I didn't feel I had the right to stand up front with the family. That's where the trouble started, the family. The will was read a week later, and it stunned everyone, me most of all. Amos had left the boat shop, the building, the tools, the whole business, to me, not to his blood, to the drifting kid he'd handed a plank to 7 years before. And along with the shop, he'd left me one strange instruction, written in his own hand. Finish the boat. You'll know the one. Take your time. Do it right. Nell's older brother, Travis, lost his mind. Travis was the kind of man who measured love in inheritance. He'd barely visited Amos in years, and now he stood in that lawyer's office and looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "This is a joke," he said. This drifter worms his way into a dying old man's life, isolates him, spends 7 years making himself indispensable, and walks off with the whole business? He's a con artist. He saw a lonely old man with a valuable shop and he moved in. You all see it, don't you? He manipulated my father. Every word of it was built out of true facts arranged into a lie. Yes, I was a drifter. Yes, I'd spent 7 years at Amos's side. Yes, I'd inherited the shop. Travis took the truth and stripped it of every decent thing. The love, the work, the fact that Amos had chosen me and not the other way around. And what was left was ugly enough that I saw a few people in that room start to wonder. I didn't defend myself. I've never been good at it, and anyway, anything I said would just be more rope for a man like Travis to hang me with. I just said, "Your father was the best man I ever knew. I'll finish the boat like he asked, and if you want to fight me over the shop, you can. I won't fight you back. But I won't say he didn't mean to give it to me, because he did, and you know he did." Nell was in that room. She didn't say a word, but she watched me the whole time, with those careful, watchful eyes, and I couldn't read what was behind them. She came to the shop the next day. She said she wanted to help sort her father's things before Travis could pack them off and sell them. But I think, really, she came for the same reason I stayed, because the shop still smelled like him, cedar and varnish and pipe smoke, and being in it was the closest either of us could get to him not being gone. So we started going through 7 years of a man's life together, the guarded daughter and the drifting apprentice, both of us wrecked, both of us pretending we weren't. And in the back corner, under a canvas tarp that had been there as long as I'd worked in that shop, was the boat. I'd never been allowed to touch it. In 7 years, Amos had worked on it only alone, only late, only a little at a time. A small, beautiful wooden sailboat, maybe 18 feet, built with a care that went beyond anything he built for sale. I'd asked about it once, early on, and he'd just said, "That one's not for selling. That one's for someone." And he never spoke of it again, and I never asked again. And it sat under its tarp for 7 years, almost finished and never launched. Finish the boat. You'll know the one. This is the one, I told Nell, pulling back the tarp. He wanted me to finish it. I never even knew who it was for. Nell went very still, looking at that half-finished hull, and something crossed her face I didn't understand yet. So I finished it. Over the next weeks, in the evenings, with Nell there more often than not, she started staying later, started bringing us dinner, started handing me tools before I asked, the way she'd clearly once handed them to her father. I finished Amos Colby's last boat. And somewhere in those weeks, in the sawdust and the lamplight and the shared grief, the fence came down. Not all at once. Nell was too scarred for all at once, but a little. She laughed one night, with her whole body, exactly the way Amos had described, at something stupid I said, and then looked shocked at herself, like she'd forgotten she still could. And I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years, and I shoved it down hard, because she was Amos's daughter, and I was the apprentice, and there was a line. There was one evening, about halfway through, that I keep coming back to. It was raining hard on the shop's tin roof, and we'd been fitting planks for hours, and Nell sat down on the crate with 2 mugs of the terrible coffee I made, and handed me one, left hand first, the way her father used to, and said, out of nowhere, "Can I ask you something? Why did you never leave?" 7 years. You could have started your own shop years ago. Dad said you had the hands for it. Because he gave me a place to belong, I said. I never had one before. You don't leave the first place that ever felt like home. She was quiet, turning her mug. That's what this shop was to me too. Before Shane. Before I decided the whole world was Shane. She looked at the rain running down the window. I used to sit right here on this crate and hand my dad tools and feel completely safe. Then I married a man who taught me that feeling safe was just letting your guard down long enough to get hurt, and I never sat on this crate again. Until you. She glanced at me. You don't flinch when I talk. Do you know how rare that is? Shane was always waiting for his turn. You just let it be quiet. Quiet's the only thing I'm good at, I said. No, she said, and there was something new in her voice. You're good at making a person feel safe. That's different. That's the rarest thing there is. And for a second, the whole 7 years of distance between us was gone, and we were just 2 people the world had thrown away too early, sitting in the one place that had ever taken us in, and I wanted to cross that line so badly it frightened me. I could see she felt it too, and then she looked away, and I looked away, and we went back to the planks, because she wasn't ready, and I didn't have the right, and the moment folded itself away. But it had happened. Whatever her father had planned, that moment on the crate wasn't in any journal. That was ours. And I think, deep down, that's why I could say what I said later, when everything nearly fell apart. Because I already knew there was something real between us that no dead man could have scripted, no matter how patient he was. The night I finished the boat, I found the carving. I'd flipped her to fit the last of the interior, and there, carved into the inside of the hull where no buyer would ever see it, where only the builder and God would know, Amos had cut words into the wood years before, in his slow, careful hand, for my Nell, and for the good man who finishes her. I knelt in that boat, and I could not breathe. I called Nell over. I showed her, and that's when she went to the shelf where we'd been stacking her father's things, and she took down the journals. Years of them, a dozen leather books, that I'd assumed were just build logs, and she opened the oldest one, dated 7 years back, and she started to read, and her hands began to shake. Because they weren't build logs, they were a plan. 7 years of a father's plan, written down. The first entry, the year Nell's marriage fell apart. My girl came home today with the light gone out of her. That man broke something in her I don't know how to fix. She says she's done with love. 22 years old. and done with love. I won't accept it. I'll find a way. I have to find a way to make sure she's not alone when I'm gone. God, let me find a way. And then, weeks later, a boy came into the shop today. A drifter, nothing to his name, sleeping in his truck. But I watched him work. Watched him with the wood. He's got the patient hands, and something in his eyes, the same thing that's in Nell's, the look of someone the world threw away too early. He doesn't know it yet, but there's a good man in there. Maybe the good man. I'm going to build that man. Slow and patient and honest. The way you build a thing that has to last. And I'm going to build a boat, and I'm going to give myself years. And if I do it right, if I don't rush it, if I don't force it, maybe when I'm gone, my Nell won't be alone. Maybe she'll finally have someone who knows how to stay. 7 years of it, every entry, watching me become the man he needed me to be. Deciding not to tell either of us, because, he wrote it plainly, you can't force this. If they know I arranged it, they'll fight it just to prove they're free. It has to look like they found each other. So I'll build the boy, and I'll build the boat, and I'll build the reasons for them to be in the same room, and then I'll get out of the way, and let them do the one part I can't do for them. Nell looked up from the journal, tears streaming, and she whispered the words I opened this story with. Silas, my dad chose you for me. She pressed her hand to her mouth. He chose you 7 years ago. He built you for me. He built this the boat, the shop, you working here. Every holiday he made sure you were at the house. He planned all of it, for years. So I wouldn't be alone when he was gone. And here's where it should have been beautiful, and instead, for a while, it nearly broke. Because Nell stood up, and the wonder on her face curdled into something like panic, and she said, "But then none of this is real, is it? I'm his. I'm his project. You're his project. This whole thing is a dead man's arrangement, and we're just doing what he scripted. How am I supposed to know if I actually feel anything, or if I'm just a grieving woman falling for the man her father hand-picked and planted in front of her? How do you know? Maybe you just feel gratitude to him and it's leaking onto me. Maybe I'm just doing what I was told for the first time in my life, without even knowing I was being told." She was crying hard now. I spent 7 years making sure no man ever decided anything about my life again. And it turns out the biggest decision of all was made for me by my own father, before I ever knew your name. And Travis, because of course Travis found out, used it like a blade. He got hold of what the journals said, and he told anyone who'd listen. See? He didn't just con my father out of the shop. The old man was matchmaking a stranger into the family. It's grooming. It's manipulation. None of it's real. Silas is executing a dead man's plan to get his hands on Colby money and a Colby wife. Truth, stripped of every decent thing, aimed to kill. I let Travis say his piece, and then, for once in my life, I found the words, because they mattered too much not to. "You're right that your father planned it," I said, to Travis, but really to Nell, standing behind him with her arms wrapped around herself. He planned all of it. He found me sleeping in a truck, and he spent 7 years making me into a man good enough for his daughter, and he never told me, and I'm not going to pretend I'm not gutted and grateful, and a little bit undone by that. I looked at Nell. But read the journals again. Read what he wrote at the end. He said there was one part he couldn't do. One part that wasn't in his power to arrange, no matter how patient he was. He could build the man. He could build the boat. He could put us in the same room 100 times. But he could not make us fall in love. He wrote it himself. That's the one part I have to leave to them. I took a breath. Your father didn't decide how I feel about you, Nell. He couldn't. That happened in this shop. These last weeks. Over sawdust and bad jokes. When he was already dead and gone, and couldn't script a single word of it. He didn't make me love you. He just made sure I'd get the chance to. That's not a cage. That's the last, best gift a father ever gave two lonely people who'd both given up. I set down my tools. He arranged the meeting. The rest is ours. It was always going to be ours. And if you walk away just to prove you're free, then you're letting Shane decide your life all over again. You're just calling him freedom this time. Real free isn't refusing the good thing because someone hoped you'd choose it. Real free is choosing it anyway, with your eyes open, because you actually want it. So want it, Nell. Or don't. But do it because it's yours to decide. That part always was. The shop was dead silent. Even Travis had nothing. Nell walked over to the boat. She ran her fingers over the carving inside the hull. For my Nell, and for the good man who finishes her. And she was quiet for a long, long time. Then she turned around, and the fence was gone from her eyes, all the way gone, and she said, "Then let's launch it. The boat, together. And I'll know when it floats, whether it's his or ours." She almost smiled. "I think it's going to be ours." We launched Amos Colby's last boat on a clear morning, 3 weeks later. The whole town came down to the water. The same coast Amos had built boats for his whole life. Travis didn't come, and in the end he didn't fight the will either. I think even he couldn't stand against a dead man's journals and a whole town that had loved Amos, and he sold me his silence and his shares and moved away, and we let him. Some people you can't win. You just refuse to let them narrate your life. Nell and I carried the boat down to the water together, and we floated her for the first time, and she sat on the sea, as true and tight as anything Amos ever built. Not a drop of the ocean finding its way in, the way he'd taught me, built patient and honest, to outlast the man who made her. And Nell stood in the shallows with her hand on the hull and cried, and laughed with her whole body, and I understood that Amos Colby had gotten everything he'd planned for, right down to the sound. Before we pushed off, Nell reached into her coat and took out the oldest journal, and she read one line aloud to the crowd on the beach. Her father's own words, the ones he'd written the day I first walked into his shop. "There's a good man in there. Maybe the good man." Then she closed the book and looked at me, standing knee-deep in her father's ocean, and she said, loud enough for the whole town to hear, "He was right." And whatever was left of Travis's ugly story just washed out with the tide. Because you cannot argue with a father's love. Read aloud on the water he loved, in front of everyone who loved him. We were married the following spring, on the beach below the shop, and we sailed away from our own wedding in her father's boat. I run the shop now. It says Colby and Ford on the sign, his name first, because he built me before I built anything. Nell moved back down the coast and never once flinched when I was kind to her again. We have a daughter now, and Nell laughs every single day. And some evenings we take Amos's boat out past the fog line and just sit on the deep water he taught me to cross safely. The two people he built a boat and a man and a plan to bring together. I think about those journals every day. 7 years. A patient old man with a failing heart, building a future for a daughter who'd given up, out of an oak plank and a drifting kid and a boat he'd never lived to launch. For a while, like Nell, I got tangled up in whether it counted, whether a love someone planned for you can really be yours. I don't wonder about that anymore. Here's what I finally understood. Amos didn't choose who I'd love. He chose who I'd get the chance to love. And then he spent 7 years making sure I'd be a man worth loving when the chance came. And then he got out of the way and let us be free. That's not arranging a life. That's the truest thing a person can do for someone they won't be around to protect. He couldn't stay, so he built us something that could carry us after he was gone. And it turned out the thing he built wasn't only the boat. It was us. My dad chose you for me, she whispered in that workshop. Terrified it meant our love wasn't real. It took me finishing his boat to understand the truth. He didn't choose me for her, in the end, like you'd choose a thing off a shelf. He chose me, and he built me, and he trusted me, with the one person on this earth he loved most. for all the years he wouldn't get to see. And I have spent every day since trying to be the man that patient old man saw in a kid asleep in a truck, 7 years before either of us knew there was a boat under that tarp, with our whole life carved inside it. If you've ever had someone believe in you before you believed in yourself, someone who quietly built you into more than you thought you could be, I want to hear about them, because those people are rarer than we ever realize until they're gone. Tell me about yours down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it always amazes me how far these stories drift out on the water. Somebody wrote in last week from a fishing town on the other side of the planet, and it stayed with me for days. And be honest with me before you go. If you found out someone you loved had quietly planned your happiness for years without telling you, would you have felt chosen, the way Nell finally did? Or would you have run, just to prove you were free? There's no wrong answer. There's only the one you'd have to live with. If this story moved something in you, do me one small kindness. Tap that like button so it finds the next person who needs it, hit subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, because I'm here every single week with a brand new story about the kind of love that's built slow and honest and made to outlast us. Fair winds. I'm glad you're here.